most common sentence you hear at work every day? Most likely it's, how are you? Right? That's the way to kick off a conversation at work. How are you? So how are you guys today? Great. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. So what do we say at work when somebody asks us, how are you? We say, yeah, I'm great, thanks. And then we get to ask in return, how are you? Right? That's the flow of things. The other person will also say, yeah, I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for asking. And after that, you can go straight to business, right? Here in Germany, it's all the small talk you need. That's it. But now what in this game of how are yous? What if one of the persons actually said something like, I don't feel good today. My child is really sick and I should probably be home, not here. Or even more pressing, my father is about to die. And so suddenly there'd be this huge emotional elephant in the room, right? And there would be this awkward moment of prolonged silence. And then finally, the other person would say, oh gosh, it's horrible. Is there anything I can do? And the other person, noticing the awkwardness, probably say, no, it's fine. Let's go to work. And then they would go to work. And then they would talk about the budget for next year, something like that, right? And meanwhile, that emotional elephant would make itself very, very comfortable in that room and will make sure that the whole meeting really turns out pretty awkward, right? So why is that the case? Well, ever since, Frederick Taylor's ideas of scientific management, organizations are supposed to be these places of stern rationality. It's about numbers, calculations, efficiency. And we as humans, with all of our emotional complexity, we're actually seen as a sort of disturbing factor, right? If you look at all these big economic theories, they have the Homo economicus, right? And that's not a human. That's like this computing machine. No emotions there. But we all know when the emotional elephant comes in the room, right? And on good days at work, we have lots of positive emotions. We have fun, and there's pride and joy and meaning. But we also know pain at work, suffering, certainly a lot of fear in organizations, right? There's suffering. Part of human life consists of suffering. And that means that also part of organizational life consists of suffering. It's a no-brainer. And that's why late Peter Frost, a management professor from the University of British Columbia, he coined this very, very powerful sentence. There's always pain in the room. That's what he said. There's always pain in the room. And the truth is, there is pain in this room right now. A couple of minutes I asked you, how are you? You said, good. But there is pain in this room right now. For some, it will be physical pain. For others, it may be emotional pain, for whatever reason. But there is pain in this room. And that means there's pain and suffering in organizations. And where does it come from? So some of that suffering is caused outside of the organizations, and people bring it in. There's trouble about money, about relationships. There is sickness. There's death and taxes. And people bring that into the office. We're kind of supposed to leave that at the front door, right? But guess what? We can't. We can hold our feelings off for some time, but we cannot get rid of them altogether. And also, here's a simple truth for you. I'm here at the business school, so I'm talking to leaders and future leaders. Leaders in organizations create suffering. You're creating suffering as a leader. When you're not creating suffering, you're probably not leading. Why is that the case? When you're leading people, a lot of times you have to make decisions about things, about budgets, but you also have to make decisions about people. Who gets to go on vacation for Christmas? Who has to stay in the office? Who gets to work on that really cool project? Who doesn't? Who gets promoted? who gets fired. Sometimes you have to make these decisions. You create suffering. And the good news is it's okay. You just have to be aware of that and you have to take care of that, right? So now that we know that there is suffering, the question is, what can we do about it? And one idea could be to just ignore it. Idea. Another idea could be to tell your people to get their shit together. And there's actually research out there that shows telling your people to get their shit together is just about the worst thing you can do. It'll drive down motivation, engagement, and employee satisfaction. So what else can we do as leaders? We can show compassion. Compassion. Now that's a strange word because it somehow doesn't seem to fit in this world of business, right? It's too soft, it's too esoteric. And the truth is, obviously, it belongs to the world of spirituality, especially Buddhism. That's where it comes from. And at the heart of compassion, there's a very simple and beautiful idea. Wishing that other people may be free from suffering. That's the core of compassion. Now, how do we get there? The good news is you don't have to go to Tibet and meditate in a cave for like 10 years. I mean, you can do it, it's probably fine. You don't have to. The truth is, even small babies act compassionately, very spontaneously. When they see somebody suffer that they care about, they will try to soothe that person's pain. We're born compassionate, and then somehow later on we forget. Now, in scientific terms, compassion always consists of a 3-step. It's noticing another person's suffering, showing empathetic concern, and then taking some action to mitigate that suffering. Compassion is more than just empathy. I mean, I could hit my thumb with a hammer right now, and then you could go, "Oh, damn, that hurts. I've done that too." But then when you stop there, when you don't care, it's not compassion. Empathy is being able to feel what another person feels. But if you stop there, and if you don't care, it's not compassion, right? So this 3-step, I like to call it realize, relate, relieve. That's the tagline for today, right? Realize, relate, relieve. That's compassion. Now, what about compassion in organizations? It can sort of occur spontaneously on the personal level between people, but it can also be built into the organizational system. Now, on the personal level, it's very, very easy. Listening to somebody, giving undivided attention to somebody who is suffering somehow, that's an act of compassion. Giving somebody a hug can be compassion. Buying somebody a coffee, a lot of compassion. Basically, whenever you're able to open up a space and hold that space where other people can show their full selves, where they can be vulnerable, that's compassion, right? Very, very easy. And then on the organizational level, think about how organizations can potentially magnify this individual compassion. Think about things like free offerings for counseling. Think about, offerings in terms of money and cutting down on employees' time for a certain time, cutting down on their working hours. Especially with severe strokes of fate, the most critical resource is time. Time to heal, time to cope. And when you give that to people as an organization, that's compassion. And then on the other end, there's things like rituals, holding rituals. With change, there's always grief. People gain something, they lose something. With that comes grief. And you have to give them time. Think about when long-term employees retire, sometimes when they pass away. We hold these rituals of farewell, right? And it's a beautiful thing. But what about the suffering that organizations create themselves? Think about layoffs, think about throwing people out of the company. You're creating suffering, right? I'm talking about relationships that are torn apart. I'm talking about people that are stripped of their pride and a big part of their life's meaning. As an organization, you have to take care of that and not resorting to, empty phrases and press releases there. can be a highly compassionate act. Now, I'm at a business school, obviously, so one question is, what's the so what of compassion in organizations? And there's a beautiful review article by Professor Jane Dutton from the University of Michigan. And she's basically able to show that when you have highly compassionate cultures, it shows up in the company's bottom line, right? Compassion unfolds its positive effects on several different layers of the organization. It's beneficial for the one on the receiving end, obviously. It's also beneficial for the one who's showing compassion. It can be beneficial for potential bystanders, and you can also create this ripple effect of compassion. So it's good and beneficial for the overall system. And there's research out there that shows compassion directly affects the bottom line. You have these heightened levels of gratitude and fellowship and meaning between your people. You have less burnout, less absence, less turnover. And on the positive side, you certainly have heightened levels of trust, of cooperation, and of satisfaction. And these things, even though they seem soft, they will show up in your bottom line over time. It's a simple truth. Now, before I wrap things up, I would also talk about what undermines compassion in organizations, right? And here, I could talk about how certain organizational values and norms are really able to kill and suffocate any compassionate acts. I could talk about overly competitive environments. I could talk about harsh hierarchical leadership. I could talk about this boys don't cry macho culture. But instead, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to talk about you, right? I'm here at this renowned business school, and in this room are business leaders and future business leaders, and that's a beautiful thing. But there comes a risk with that. There's lots of research out there that shows basically when we are rising in status and power, when we get promoted, when we rise to the top of the ranks, we get less compassionate. First, we lose empathy. We don't care as much what other people are feeling. And when we get more powerful, and in turn, we are less compassionate. And then there's other research that basically shows powerful people are also less willing to share their own negative emotions. And that means there's also very unlikely that they'll be at the receiving end of compassion, right? And in turn, you have this huge, what I'd like to call compassion gap at the top of most org charts. What's the problem with that? Those guys or women then shape the organizational culture, right? We're all looking up to these people, and they set the tone for the organization. They get less compassionate as they rise up, and then they shape the organizational culture. That's a vicious circle. That's why most big organizations tend to become less compassionate over time. Unless the leaders of that organization purposefully counteract this emotional decline. So, compassion, you would have guessed it, starts with you. Most of you are just about to embark on their professional journey, and some of you will join existing corporations and then maybe rise to the top. Some of you will go into politics or public service or NGOs, and you may rise to the top. And hopefully a lot of you will build their own companies, or you will take on responsibility in your family's business, right? And it's all good. You can all find happiness. Just remember one thing. When you go to work, it's always you. And it's always all of you. There's no different version of you that you can send off to work. It's always all of you. So, when you go to work, dare to bring your whole self to work. When you lead people, dare to encourage them to bring their whole self to work. When you build a business, dare to build a business where people can be their best, their whole selves. Dare to be a compassionate leader. Dare to lead from the heart. Thank you.